I would like to open this first at-home homecoming by recognizing that McGill University is on land which long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous people whose presence have enriched this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. En cette toute première édition des retrouvailles virtuelles, permettez-moi d'abord de souligner que l'Université McGill est située sur un territoire qui a longtemps été un lieu de rencontre et d'échange pour les peuples autochtones, notamment pour les nations Haudenosaunee et Anishinaabe. Nous saluons et remercions les divers peuples autochtones qui ont enrichi de leur présence ce territoire qui accueille aujourd'hui des gens de partout dans le monde.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful. Thank you all for attending our event today. My name is Ahmad Wali, one of the co-directors of the McGill Muslim Alumni Society, or the MAS for short, because it's somewhat of a mouthful. I'm a 2018 graduate of McGill University. I'm honored to welcome you all to the first MAS participation in the annual McGill Homecoming celebrations, and hopefully the first of many to come. If you're not familiar with the homecoming tradition, and I wasn't not too long ago, it's an opportunity to celebrate the McGill institution, its students, its alumni, including the many Muslims who have passed through its halls or its 200-year history. I think that McGill Muslim students and alumni deserve recognition and celebration for their accomplishments, and I hope that this event will be a first step towards that. Thank you for coming to our first event. Homecoming is a long tradition, and I'm glad that we're going to be a part of it. And I'm sure that many of you, like myself, considered McGill home for formative years of your life. So on behalf of McGill and the MAS, welcome home. I want to talk a little bit about our history, because we're a relatively young institution or organization. The MAS was founded by myself and my friend and colleague, Nazim El-Husseini, who some of you may know. We're both involved in the McGill Muslim Student Association and spent many years on campus, longer than the usual 4-year undergraduate degree. And over that time, both during our involvement with the MSA, the Muslim Student Association, and as individual students, we realized that McGill Muslim students did face a lot of challenges. One of the bigger ones was the lack of a stable, reliable prayer space. We had challenges with different organizational institutions, and space on downtown campus is limited. We also realized that Muslim students had unique needs in terms of their mental and spiritual health, and that the services that McGill offers, though excellent and very well needed, may not always be sufficient. Looking around at campus and at the different institutions and the different religious groups as well, we saw that many of them had large organizations and large associations that they could go to for support, and realized that that was lacking for the Muslim students at McGill. We wanted to build that larger organization and that network to address these larger issues that individual students and student associations themselves couldn't deal with. And what's more, we want to create a lasting legacy of ihsan, of excellence, and of beauty in this truly wonderful place that serves as a home and a school for us and for many generations of Muslim students, in light of the teachings of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Peace be upon him. So with those goals in mind of addressing needs of Muslim students at McGill and celebrating them, we started and founded the MAS with support from organizations such as the McGill Alumni Association, who've been huge partners for us, the McGill Office for Religious and Spiritual Life, or MORSL, and the Muslim Student Association itself. We established the MAS last year, organizing an executive team of McGill alumni and students. In that past year, we've registered over 200 members of the society, hopefully more now, and held several events and activities in Montreal and in Toronto, as well as online in light of the recent pandemic, perhaps not so recent anymore. These events included social events like a barbecue in Toronto, which I hope some of our participants have managed to attend, student and peer networking events where they could get to know other students and alumni, as well as mentorship events because we did want to support our younger students or students who are still at McGill. We also hosted educational lectures and webinars, inviting renowned scholars and professionals. We hope to continue those efforts and achieve our future goals, such as providing student mentorship and support, as well as professional development for those of our members who have long graduated from school but still want to have that network. We hope to continue these efforts and achieve our future goals and long-term goals as well. And these include helping establish a permanent prayer space, establishing chaplaincy services to provide mental and spiritual health for McGill Muslim community, and potentially even establishing scholarships for Muslim students or students that would support a Muslim presence at McGill. You can learn more about our events and future events and our goals and history on our website. So a quick plug for the massociety.org. Our vision is to establish a vibrant network of McGill Muslim graduates to provide strength, support, and prosperity for both students and alumni. We want to have a lasting legacy to promote the success and well-being of Muslim students, not just now and for the years in the future, but for generations to come. These are ambitious goals, no doubt, and it'll undoubtedly be a long, long journey, but I hope you'll take the first steps with us. Finally, I want to say that any society is a little more than the sum of its members. It's through creating and supporting a vibrant and connected group of students and alumni that the Mass will grow. I'm honored that you've decided to join us today and hope that you share our vision and you'll help our young society grow and thrive. So thank you. And now I'm going to hand the reins over to our moderator and our speaker.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation, Ahmer. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Munema Moiz, and I'm going to be your MC for this event. So I'm going to quickly go over the schedule that we have planned for you today. But before that, I'm just going to reiterate, if you have your audio or video on, please just keep it off for the duration of the speaker's talk and during the Q&A session. You will have some time near the end to switch it on to meet other people, but it helps us conserve bandwidth if you keep it off until necessary. So as an overview of today's proceedings, we're going to begin with a 20 to 25 minute talk by our speaker. While he's talking, please feel free to enter any questions or comments you may have for him in the chat box. We'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll bring those up for him in the Q&A session. So we're going to have a Q&A session after he's done speaking for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then after the Q&A sessions, we are going to begin a 20 to 30 minute networking session. So you'll all be divided into breakout rooms and you can meet each other and get to talk with other participants. I'll explain the details of that closer to the actual time. And then after the networking session, we'll all come back for some closing remarks, and we're hoping to wrap up the event by about 7:30. Okay, so just a reminder, keep your audio and video off until the networking session. Okay, so I am honored to introduce the speaker for this event, Mohammed Ashour. Mohammed Ashour is a leading voice in social enterprise. It is difficult for me to list all of his accomplishments, as he has done so much, and I promise you it took me a very long time trying to summarize all of his accomplishments, but I'm going to give it a go. So, in terms of education, Mohammed graduated from the University of Toronto with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Life Sciences in 2009. He then pursued a Master's of Science degree in Neuroscience from McGill University, from which he graduated in 2011. He later went back to McGill to pursue an MD, MBA dual degree and obtained his MBA in 2019. However, his business accomplishments are even more impressive. So in 2014, Mohammed led a team of talented students to win the largest business prize in the world, the prestigious Hult Prize, which was presented to Mohammed's team by President Bill Clinton. After winning this $1 million prize, Mohammed became the co-founder and CEO of Aspire Food Group, a social enterprise aiming to address food insecurity. Aspire Food Group is a vertically integrated agriculture and food company that addresses global food sustainability by developing the most advanced insect farming technology in the world. With his expertise in business development, finances, and strategic partnerships, Mohammed leads Aspire's operations and growth. Mohammed's accomplishments have been recognized by many organizations. He has been listed on Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 list. He is also the recipient of the 2018 Leadership Award from the Specialty Food Association. Other awards include the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award and the Top MBA Impact Maker Award from McGill University. His achievements have been featured in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and Bloomberg Business Week, just to name a few. So the McGill Muslim Alumni Society is absolutely thrilled to have Mohammed Ashour as our speaker today. He joins us to speak about his success as a McGill Muslim alumnus and how he pursued his career and personal goals while maintaining Islamic principles. We also hope to learn from him how to navigate some of the challenges one might face at school and the workplace as a Muslim living in Western society. So without further ado, I would like to now welcome Mohammed Ashour to speak. And again, I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll get to them during the Q&A session. And please keep your video and audio off. So everyone, please welcome Mohammed Ashour.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me. That was an unbelievably glowing introduction. It's also a convenient one because I think for those of you who are astute, you may have realized that it took me 7 years to finish my MBA, so I don't think that's terribly impressive. And on top of that, the fact that this entire experience that we've had, with the Hult Prize happened at McGill and actually was born at McGill is a very, very big part of our story. And today really my goal is to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes giving you a little bit of background, not necessarily about what I've been up to since I left McGill University, but maybe to go a little bit further back and talk about what led me to come to McGill in the first place, and to what degree the experiences I've had at McGill have colored and shaped my experience, alhamdulillah, throughout the last decade of my life. So for those of you who, you may or may not know this, but I was actually born in Saudi Arabia. This is where my father was working. My parents are both of Egyptian descent. So that's definitely where my roots are. But I was born in Saudi Arabia, which is where my father was working at the time. And I grew up actually in Saudi Arabia for the first, decade of my life. And, obviously, immigrating to Canada when I think it was finally 12 when we finally came here. It was a tremendous change, not just culturally, but also environmentally. I'd never seen snow in my life, like many of us who've experienced a similar immigration. And of course, a lot of change was needed. But fortunately, by the time I moved to Canada, I had already moved around within Saudi Arabia 8 times. So I was always very, very comfortable with transition. The same cannot be said for my wife, whom, as an aside, when we got married, that was the very first time she moved out of her house. So it took us a bit of a time to adjust to our different paces. And I think that's an incredible life lesson too, that, just because you're accustomed to a certain way of experiencing the world, you have to understand that that's not necessarily the experience everyone else has. And you have a lot to learn from everyone else's experiences as well. So I grew up, by virtue of having Egyptian parents, of course, I grew up with the unbelievable support from my parents, who focused too much on education. And as far as they were concerned, I could be anything in the world I wanted to be, as long as it was a doctor or engineer. But in all seriousness, I developed a real passion for clinical medicine very early in my life. I found it to be not just very intellectually stimulating, but growing up serving people was always in and of itself its own reward for me, and it's something that I've always enjoyed. And I just found that as a career path, medicine had the capacity to be a career choice, which enables me to express and practice this desire to serve others, and in a manner that is very intellectually stimulating to myself. And so by the time I completed my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, and that'll be the last mention of a competing university I'll make in this address, I moved on to McGill to do my master's in neuroscience. And actually at this point, I had become so fascinated with the brain that my conviction was that I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And it's amazing how you carve out a path for yourself and you have a vision for where you want to go. But sometimes when that vision isn't anchored in a specific end goal, you may still get to where you want to get, but you might get there in a very different fashion, in a very different vehicle than you ever imagined. And remember, what drove me to want to be a physician was to have a very positive impact on people's health and lives, and to genuinely have an opportunity to serve and have an impact on the widest range of people possible. Now, when I applied to medical school the first time, I didn't get an acceptance. In fact, I didn't even get a single interview. And so I decided to spend that year while I reapply looking for work. And I decided to challenge myself and work at a startup. And that's because I had actually grown up in a family where there are no entrepreneurs on either side of my family. I mean, I think we have this like one great uncle who's like a mythical figure that supposedly built something once upon a time. But I mean, that's just allegation. I don't actually know if that's true. So bottom line is, grew up in a very studious academic family, but no real entrepreneurial role models. And in fact, my early exposure to business wasn't particularly flattering. I held the view then, and I actually, to some degree, although it's much more nuanced now, still, like many of you, acknowledge that there's an uncomfortable number of businesses around the world that place shareholder return above everything else in terms of metrics for the value they create in society. And sometimes that means subordinating environmental impact, social progress, and other things of that nature, which thankfully more and more businesses are starting to wake up and dramatically and fundamentally change the way they do business, because consumers are demanding better from these companies. But nonetheless, growing up, that was just my experience. And so I challenged myself to work at a startup, and that was a monumental life experience, because that startup, which was based in Waterloo, exposed me to the fact that business can actually be used to do good. And this particular startup had developed a really unique software that enabled students to be able to use their mobile devices, their laptops, their iPads, to actually participate and engage in the classroom. So rather than professors being annoyed that students are bringing these devices to their classroom, now professors had an opportunity to actually allow the students to convert this distracting tool into the very medium with which they can participate in the class material. And I think that experience really opened up my eyes. And in fact, it was so inspirational that I decided to change my application to McGill's medical school from just the MD program to the MD MBA program. And I was extremely fortunate that, in March of 2012, I actually received an offer of admission. And that summer, when I started the program, it was a 5-year program. And the way it's structured is it's 1 year of business school followed by 4 years of medicine. And so in the very first month of that experience, I obviously came across the Hult Prize competition, which wasn't so much a competition as it was a dare. And it was a dare to build a business that had the capacity to really change the world. And I won't bore you with the details other than to say that I was able to use successfully a resume binder that was given to me and all of my classmates at the very beginning of the MBA program, which nicely contained the resume of every one of my classmates. So it was a really good way to recruit the founding team of Aspire. And as was already mentioned, alhamdulillah, we had the immense honor and privilege of actually winning the $1 million prize, in the process defeating 10,000 other concepts and companies from around the world. There's one thing I always say, and I'm keen to say in every public address that I give to anyone, regardless of audience size, regardless of where in the world, and I'll say it now. I believe very strongly in hard work. I believe very strongly in excellence in what we do. And those are very much these are the ethos that make us who we are as Muslims. These are the very teachings that are embedded in the fiber of what makes us who we are. But at the same time, I also believe that there is such a thing as tawfiq. And you may loosely call that luck in certain philosophical outlooks or, randomness, but there certainly is an aspect of opportunity and fortune that it has nothing to do with anyone's hard work or willpower. One of my favorite quotes of all time is written by a great environmentalist, and basically it says, "If wealth was the inevitable result of hard work and enterprise, every woman in Africa would be a millionaire." And having actually been around the world and having seen how many people around the world work excruciating hours daily for output that by many of our Western standards are extremely, modest in scope, you begin to quickly realize that those people who are, by whatever metric that we use to assign the term successful, have a tremendous amount of fortune behind them. And I say that because it's important to recognize, and when you have success, it's important to recognize that you couldn't have gotten where you did without a tremendous amount of opportunity, being at the right place at the right time, having someone who was very keen and honest, and having people who were willing to take a risk on you, and people who went out of their way to support you. And I think this event is an amazing example of how we, as an alumni group, whom this university gave so much to, we have a responsibility to be supportive to others and to give them opportunities. In fact, after we won that $1 million prize, so we won that in September 23rd of 2013, 3 weeks later, October of that same year, Principal Suzanne Fortier, with whom I still have a great relationship, invited myself and a couple of my colleagues to attend the McGill homecoming dinner. And not only that, I was given the tremendous honor of actually being seated on the head table immediately to the right of Principal Fortier. And so while I was sitting there, of course, to me, this was such an incredible opportunity. And I was so thrilled to be, to have an opportunity to speak with her and, get to network with the principal of the university or the president of the university. And without my knowledge, the person who was sitting to my right, I didn't know who they were, but I could tell they're important because everybody kept kind of swarming them and surrounding them and asking them questions. And candidly, it started getting a bit irritating because I'm trying to pay attention to my conversation with Principal Fortier, and all this buzz is happening. Unbeknownst to me, the principal goes up, she gives a toast to Aspire. She mentions our achievement, which at this point is still pretty fresh. And then she invites the keynote speaker, who was the gentleman sitting to my right, Darren Entwistle, the CEO of TELUS, to come up and give the address. And so that event, that opportunity, that fortunate experience, which I had no influence over, the decision that was made by someone to let me sit down between Darren and the principal, just so happened to lead Darren and I to spend the next 2 hours of that homecoming dinner speaking about global food security, innovation in business, social enterprise. And that led to a cascade of events that today, 7 years later, TELUS is one of our large investors. Darren is a great advisor, friend, and mentor. And we're actually, now that we're building the world's largest facility here in London, Ontario, for the indoor climate-controlled vertical agriculture associated with protein production, in this case, farming crickets, TELUS is actually a very big partner that's going to help us deploy this project using IoT and a number of other technological systems that we're partnering on. But all this arguably may never have happened if I wasn't seated next to the principal and Darren at McGill's homecoming event. So that's another example of how these opportunities and these events can really create this butterfly effect of, wonderful doors that open up that give you exciting and interesting career options. And I'm just being mindful of my time here. I want to definitely make sure I give plenty of time to the Q&A and I hit some of the key points I want to address. One of the things that I'll mention, and again, for those of you who are astute who were listening to the introduction, you may have noticed that even though I started my MD MBA at McGill, I only finished my MBA, and it took me 7 years because I tried to finish it while I was running my company. And as far as medical school, I actually withdrew from the program because it was just unconscionable for me to continue to hold a seat in that faculty when obviously building this business became really the calling of my life. And I think therein kind of lies an important lesson. As I mentioned before, you sort of begin with a vision statement for what you want to do. In my case, it was obvious. I want to do something that is going to tremendously impact as many people's lives positively, specific to their health. And I wanted to do so in a manner that is very challenging and engaging and rewarding to myself. As it happens, up to 2012, my imagination allowed me to imagine only up to the limitation of clinical medicine being the optimal way to exercise this entire vision. But when I went through this experience and started this company, that actually made me realize that in this particular case, this may be a much more significant way to apply that vision than perhaps if I were to be a clinical physician. And that's actually a big part of why I don't really see what I've done as leaving or sort of, departing from what I wanted to become. It's actually more, I've identified a way to get to where I want to get to faster, more effectively, and hopefully with a greater degree of impact. And I think that, it's really crucial, whenever you're in the process of building anything, to keep that open mind and to understand that, you're going to take so many twists and turns throughout your career. And you may not know where you're going to end up, but what's important is to constantly audit what it is that you actually want, what gives you that fulfillment and that meaning and that sense of real purpose and that excitement to wake up in the morning to pursue that. And for some of us, that may take a lot longer to figure out than others, and that's okay. I mean, if you look at our Islamic tradition, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was 40 when the purpose of his life was revealed and ultimately the calling of his existence didn't really begin to get exercised until he was in his 40s. And so again, it's really crucial to also be gentle on yourself when you kind of feel frustrated that you know where you want to get, but you're not there yet, or you're not even sure that you have the GPS to navigation system to help you get there. Because as long as you have that drive and determination, and as long as you create opportunities for yourself and network with people and keep an open mind, those chances may come up and be helpful. Now, again, I'll try to leave as much time as possible to Q&A, but I do want to devote a few minutes to talking a little bit about, some of the challenges of, and this was something that the organizers had asked me to speak about, which is, as a Muslim and as a proud Canadian and as an entrepreneur, there can sometimes be a conflict between, some of your values and some of the things you're trying to do. And there could be situations where you may feel alienated because of your identity or because of your values from the society in which you live. And I think that fundamentally, it's important to be true to who you are. And this is not in any way to suggest that the business world is always going to be kind to you by just being who you are, or that, discrimination doesn't happen, or that, people won't, you won't face adversity by virtue of being a minority. I mean, we're aware that these things are there and they exist. And I think right now, as a global society, we're undergoing a serious reckoning as it relates to things like social and racial justice and all these extremely important things that, it's really a matter of time that we now take these concerns and these grievances and turn them into action. But at the same time, I think it's also crucial to understand that, as a Muslim, you should fundamentally understand that as long as what you're doing is aligned with your values, in the case of the business that I'm running, this is a business that intrinsically is trying to develop a better way to feed the planet. And it's better for humans because it's better for our bodies, better for our nutrition, better for our health and longevity. It's better for the environment because it uses less resources like land, water, and energy, and arable land, and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, there's the question of, is what I'm devoting myself to aligned with my values? And I know that sounds like a basic question, but it's actually shocking how many people I know are extremely unfulfilled in their day-to-day jobs because they're investing some very precious years of their lives advancing a cause or a mission or a vision or a company whose fundamental premise is questionable at best, and in some cases entirely abhorrent. And I think that it's really important, and you owe it to yourself to have that honest internal dialogue about whether or not whatever it is you're pursuing aligns closely with your values. And the other aspect is to be very mindful of the fact that there's a time and place for everything. So within the context of my business, and as by virtue of being CEO, I travel around the world. I did back in the day when airplanes were a thing and you could travel. I traveled extensively. I would travel about 250,000 miles a year. I racked up like every single platinum status you can imagine on every airline just because of how much traveling I've been doing. And, you're mingling with all sorts of people and all these high-powered meetings. And absolutely, there are situations that are very uncomfortable. And they're not just uncomfortable because I'm Muslim, they're uncomfortable because I have values and I want to be, loyal to those values. A simple and concrete example, I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink alcohol. I never have. And that's largely because that is my conviction. It's my conviction rooted in my faith, but it's also, in this particular case, also rooted in a pretty abundant amount of robust scientific literature. And that's something that I don't apologize for. But the key here is if you're at an event and other people are engaging in drinking alcohol or whatever, it's a fine line between you not participating and then you moralizing to other people and kind of beating people over the head with what they should do with their own lives. And again, I think that there's a big distinction between being true to your core values and shoving those values down other people's throats. And, certainly you may have a colleague or a peer or a co-founder where you might have very interesting political discussions, or even sometimes you can talk about religion or what have you. And that could be the time and place in those private contexts. And there's so much nuance here, by the way, that I don't want this to be taken out of context. If you're a boss, you never have a conversation about religion with a subordinate. You just don't. There's so many complicated issues associated with that. It could be a form of, discrimination. It could be a form of making people uncomfortable. And you have to understand that, the more power you have within an organization, even when what you are talking about or asking or doing, with your employees may seem innocuous, it can always be misconstrued or misunderstood just because of that, that power differential. But again, provided the context is appropriate and suitable, and I'm happy to dive into that either in the Q&A or the networking sessions. But to bring it back to McGill, I'll be honest, I was looking forward to this event probably more than anyone here for the selfish reason that it became an amazing way to see. And I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to look at, people and actually see people's cameras, because I've already seen names of people I haven't seen in 7 or 8 years, but were such an incredible part and a very formative part of my experience at McGill, whether it was the McGill MSA or other students or faculty. And I've always and always will have a very soft spot for this institution, largely because of the experiences that I've been fortunate to have. And that's not to say that it's all been perfect, but you'll always look back at these years and find so much impact that your time in either undergrad or graduate studies has had on the way you approach the world and the way you approach your career. So as a final remark, if there's anything I can personally do for anybody here, if I can serve you in any way, if I can provide some advice, if I can introduce you to somebody in my network or anything of that sort, please don't hesitate to reach out. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be pretty responsive there. I'm sure I can organize and figure out a way to share my contact information via the organizers. But I want you to try to take as much advantage of the opportunity today to network with others, because you never know who's going to be, the person to open up a door for you next. And you can sometimes really underestimate where that opportunity is going to come from. So it's a tremendous honor to be back. Although we're all physically distant and I wish I was in Montreal, I am actually back in Canada now. I officially moved to London, Ontario, which is where we're going to be moving our headquarters and building our facility, which is inshallah going to happen and is already underway and will be live within the next 12 months. So it's a really exciting time for the business. I deliberately didn't want to take a detour and talk too much about Aspire, just to respect the time we have, but happy to answer any questions anybody has, and look forward to the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Mohammed. And you were right on time. So that was pretty amazing. Thank you. That was so interesting and so helpful, especially when you were talking about, trying to maintain your sense of vision, even if that ends up taking you down a path you weren't necessarily planning for. I know that I'm kind of going through like a semi-career change right now. So it's something a little bit hard to do. And that kind of links into one of the questions that came in. And someone asked, how do you during your sort of daily grind of, working your business and taking phone calls and arranging meetings, how do you kind of maintain your sense of vision? And how do you not let the daily grind kind of overwhelm you?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody does that differently, but I'll tell you what I do. So for me, every year, actually the last week of every year, I kind of have almost like a personal one-day retreat. And what that is just me personally reflecting on going back to the vision statement that I have for myself and my family. I mean, when I left McGill and I left Montreal in 2015, we were a family of three, myself, my wife, and at the time our daughter, who was a year and a half. Now we're a family of five. We have 3 kids now. And so, that vision isn't just your vision anymore. It's the vision of whoever it is that's a key stakeholder, and they have a say in molding that vision and sculpting that vision. And that vision now encompasses our kids and what we want for them. And yes, there can be tensions between the vision you had for yourself when you were alone and now the vision that you ought to have, given all of the other developments in your life and all the other things that you equally value that you also want to progress in advance. So I don't think you need to have a daily conversation with yourself and beat yourself up every day about what you're doing. But I think there has to be a time, and you have to pick that time. And it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, but you have to take a time and I mean, literally make the time. So take a vacation day and get away from everybody. And this is actually a beautiful tradition, again, rooted in our deen. We all know that the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to periodically go to a cave and essentially camp out for days, sometimes weeks, and in a few rare occasions over a month, where he's basically having a silent retreat. And the purpose of that retreat is to unplug from all of the noise, unplug from all of that daily grind, and reset the moral compass, reset the vision compass, and ask yourself those obvious but actually hard questions. What is my vision statement? What is the vision that I had last year, this time of year? Have I moved the needle, or am I still kind of where I am? And even if I'm still where I am, that's okay, but is there progress at least? Am I trending in the right direction? Is there directionality? If last year you said to yourself, I am sick of this job, I am unfulfilled, it's making me miserable, I don't feel like I'm adding value to the world and to society, and a year later you're still in that position, you shouldn't be harsh on yourself unless you literally did nothing. But if you've made some progress, if you have a plan and you've moved that plan forward, I'm going to do part-time school in the evening to get such and such certification so that I can then transition to this other career. But realistically, that's a 2-year process, which means I'm going to willingly put up with this position for the next 2 years. But see, there's a shot clock. You have to hold yourself accountable to that. So that is an integral part of how we need to live. And it's actually pretty shocking how obvious that advice sounds, but very, very few people literally take the time off to get away from everything and just look from a distance, zoom out and look at yourself, from the outside, and ask yourself, am I moving in the right direction? And am I proud of this? And by the way, that the answers to those questions have to be rooted in your values, because success isn't just measured in how many degrees, accolades, how much more money you now have. It's measured in, are you progressing in your health? Are you progressing in your spirituality? Are you progressing with your family? Because you may all of a sudden be crushing it on the education front in terms of income, but your marital life is in disarray. Your children are barely getting any of your attention. You've contributed nothing meaningful as a volunteer to your community, a community, by the way, which desperately needs your skill set and your intelligence and your expertise, and which can benefit greatly from it. So I think that's a really important thing to do. And I think that's something everybody can do, and in my humble opinion, should do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Like just the idea of, I guess, like scheduling in reflection time. I feel like that's like we kind of have that in our religion about really trying to sit down and think about what you're doing, think about what you did for the day, think about what you did, for the year when it comes to the holy month of Ramadan. But even just sort of from a more career perspective, and how your ethics goes into your career. You mentioned sort of the idea of like not necessarily reaching your goals and sort of you should try to make some progress. And one of the audience members asked, how do you deal with failure in the context, sort of more practically speaking, but also in the context of your faith? If you're finding that you're not meeting your goals, how do you deal with maybe your self-esteem? How do you stay resilient, especially if you have very high goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question. I mean, and I'm really tempted not to regurgitate cliches like, failure makes you stronger and we only learn from our failures. And I think everybody here is intelligent enough and experienced enough to have heard and experienced that firsthand. But maybe I'll approach it slightly differently. Again, rooting it back to our spiritual traditions. One of my favorite hadith, one of my favorite traditions from the Prophet, peace be upon him, is his saying that, I am amazed at the affair of a believer because no matter what they experience, they're going to be successful. If they are afflicted with a hardship, they are patient and overcome and identify the wisdom behind that hardship, and that makes them progress. And if they're blessed with a provision or a benefit or some sort of success, they are thankful and grateful, and that enables them to progress. And I think those are two sides of a coin, because every one of us invariably is going to vacillate between success and failure. Now, obviously, sometimes you might have a much deeper valley of failure and a smaller hill of success, and vice versa. But the fact of the matter is every one of us is going to experience that. And it's not just in career, although I recognize that's the context here, but it's also in many other aspects of your life. And that's a big part of what makes you whole. And again, I promise I'll focus on career moving forward in the Q&A, but having now kind of, appreciated that I'm building essentially 3 startups at the same time, like a family, which is a startup, a company, which is a startup. And, you begin to take a big step back and evaluate what really matters the most. And actually, I noticed on here today, if I'm not mistaken, is our director of finance, Sam Bakhshalian, who actually is a McGill grad and whom I recruited mercilessly to move down to Austin, Texas to join our company. He's actually, inshallah, expecting his second child any day now. And again, you see this with the people around you that you've grown to really appreciate, that, it's not just what defines happiness and success for them isn't just how they're doing in their career. That's a huge part of it, but it's how are their families faring? How's everybody coping? So to answer your question, I think that you have to understand that when you experience failure, it's challenging, but you must meet that failure immediately with some degree of humility and patience. Don't immediately resign and give up. And at the same time, don't immediately just brush it off and convince yourself that you should take no blame and no responsibility for what led to that failure. The right thing to do is to take a big step back and assess what led to that failure, what can you control and therefore improve so that next time, your odds of failure decrease, but also recognize what you can't control. And there are so many things that are beyond your control. And again, this is not to give people a cop-out or an easy way out, but the fact of the matter is, as I've already indicated, there are just so many things that can conspire at any given moment that you can't control that may not lead to your success. I know many startup founders who are far more intelligent than I am, far more creative, far more industrious, and their companies, may have only survived a year or two. And that's not because, and the problem we have as a society is we have this survival bias where, and I'm not trying to pick on you, Munema, but when you were giving my bio, everything you listed there was positive, right? Like, I didn't hear you say, and by the way, Mohammed struggled, for 3 of the last 7 years to raise capital for his company, or, by the way, Mohammed, is terrible at soccer or whatever the case is, right? He's trying so hard since he was a kid. So I think that the reality is when we see success, I mean, I think first and foremost, we have a very flawed perception of success. We look at some very basic superficial metrics like net worth or, traction of a company or whatever, and we just assume that these people must be great and at what they're doing. But we may be overestimating that and over-ascribing that. So in terms of failure, the first thing is meet that failure with a sense of humility and patience and an analytical mind, because that has to be what drives you to progress and change, to identify what can be done better and to make that commitment to be better and to do better. And at the same time, to resign to the fact that you will do your best, but in the end of the day, there's that X factor we described earlier of fortune, and that's not something you can control, and you shouldn't punish yourself for that. And that's why your goal as a Muslim should never be perfection, because perfection is a narcissistic pursuit that ends in a heartbreak and is never actualized, because by definition, to achieve perfection, you have to be perfect, and no human is. Our goal is excellence. What that means is you leave everything out on the field. You give it your all, and then you leave it, and however way things play out, you roll with the punches. And if it's a failure, you learn and you evolve. And if it's a success, you're humble and you show gratitude for that success, because in this particular case, you happen to be on the receiving end of good fortune, like many other people aren't.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And it's just interesting how sort of your faith in Islam and tawfiq, meaning opportunity or fate, I guess, is sort of interwoven into this sort of solution-focused approach to life. We're getting a lot of questions about your business and then just business in general. So I'm going to ask you, if possible, if you could sort of tell the audience a little bit more about your business so they have a sense of really what it is that you do. And then if you don't mind sort of also talking about how you sort of planned starting up a business and how you managed to surround yourself with people who like other students and people who are really appropriate for founding a successful business.
Yeah, I'm happy to. To go back to explain the premise of our business, I think it's important to understand the problem the business is trying to solve, and there has to be a why behind everything that is being done. In our case, I think there was an eye-opening realization that I had and my team had back when we were competing in the Hult Prize, that this global problem of food insecurity, which is not having access to safe, affordable, and nutritious food, is very intimately tied to another problem, and that's the problem of food sustainability. And that, in a nutshell, just means that the way we are producing food today in the world is not sustainable. And it's not sustainable because of the stress it places on the environment. So, for example, in the last decade, we've deforested 91% of the Amazon just so that we can create room to farm soy and corn, so that we can feed cows soy, and so we can turn that corn into ethanol for transportation sector. We're using about 80% of the world's fresh water supply in our current agricultural output. If you take all of the land on Earth that's already spoken for in terms of agriculture, it's equivalent to the land mass of Africa, North America, South America, and Europe. So we're living in a world where there's a paradox, where two types of paradoxes. The first paradox is we're increasing in population and appetite while we're actually shrinking in resources like land and water and energy that are fundamentally needed to produce the food to serve those appetites and increased populations. The second paradox is you have two types of malnutrition, because malnutrition just means bad or insufficient nutrition. You have undernutrition, which we're all very familiar with, people who are food insecure that don't have access to safe, affordable food, over 1 billion people in the world. But then you have overnutrition. So many people, more than any other point in history, are now consuming calories that are not only harmful to the environment, but harmful to their bodies. And we have burdens like obesity and diabetes that are correlated to this overconsumption that, again, historically never existed, in many of the previous cohorts of generations. And the United Nations FAO estimates that we need to double our food production in the next 30 years. So to make matters worse, we need to actually now take our food production system, which is already in overdrive, and double it. That's just a collision course. And so we realize that what we need is to fundamentally rethink the way food is being produced. Just like the car was a fundamental rethink on horses as a form of transportation. We need to rethink the way we're producing food and the way we're consuming food. So it's not just how do we farm better, how do we raise cattle more efficiently? No, it's how do we transform, if we can do it all over again, how do we transform our food production system? And that's when we came across the extraordinary insight that insects are one of the most extraordinary superfoods in existence. So in addition to being an exceptional source of complete lean protein, insects are an excellent source of many vitamins and minerals, etc. And to make things even more impressive, the production of insects uses a fraction of the amount of land, water, energy, greenhouse gas emissions than virtually any other form of livestock. And again, that's owed to the fact that these are very, very biologically efficient organisms. But there's one problem, well, there's a couple of problems. The first is insects aren't consumed everywhere in the world. Yes, it's true that there's 2 billion people, according to the United Nations FAO, who consume insects, but there's 8 billion people in the world. So it's not a product for everybody. The second problem is nobody's really figured out a way to produce insects at scale. So if you go to Oaxaca, Mexico, sure, you're going to find, a microeconomy that springs up in the summers when grasshoppers are in season, where farmers start to collect the grasshoppers from their fields and then they sell them in the open markets. And by the way, because of how much demand there is for the grasshoppers, they end up being more expensive than beef, chicken, and pork combined, right? So we figured if we can come up with a way, now there's 3 problems with that. First, these insects are being pulled from the wild, so we don't even know what they're eating, and they could be very unsafe and unsanitary. They can be, eating pesticides and toxins and things like that. Right. Secondly, they're only seasonally available for a few months. So that's not a protein source you can make available year round. And finally, they are extremely expensive precisely because of their seasonality and short-term availability. So we figured if we can come up with a way to farm insects indoor using climate-controlled agriculture, data analytics, advanced applied artificial intelligence to process and optimize that data to improve the farming in real time, to make it more efficient. And if we can do this in an indoor climate controlled environment, and if we can turn these insects into a protein ingredient that is odorless and flavorless and can basically be used to fortify any food product, we can literally build the densest protein production system in the world, and we could deploy it virtually anywhere. Now, for the last 7 years since winning the Hult Prize, we spent 6 of those 7 years in deep R&D. We've invested lots of time and lots of money to demonstrate that we can, in fact, do this at a huge commercial scale and that there is the demand for it. And alhamdulillah, in the last 24 months, we've crossed a huge milestone that has now led us to affirmatively move forward with building the world's largest indoor cricket farming facility, and that's going to be here in London, Ontario. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing. Thank you very much.
That's amazing. I used to live in London, Ontario, and it's a really nice place actually. Although I don't think I ever saw cricket there. I saw frogs. I think actually it's funny. I'm getting some comments here that people, I don't know who, but someone's tried your cricket flour and they're asking how they can purchase more. If it's okay, maybe we'll share your information in an email afterwards. If people have more specific questions, they can contact you. I think for the last question, maybe I'll just sort of keep it a bit broad. There's quite a few questions just about the process of starting a business or being an entrepreneur. So if you could just maybe, for 2 or 3 minutes, give some advice to people on who to talk to if they want to start up a business, like what sort of advice should they really try to solicit? And at what point do you know that your startup isn't working and that you should maybe try a different avenue?
Yeah, so I'm going to resist the urge to kind of like lecture people now that I've figured it out. Here's what to do. I actually despise that. I think that, again, you should take whatever I'm about to say and honestly everything I've said with a grain of salt, because one of my favorite quotes, aside from the one I mentioned earlier by Montbaillon, is actually by a venture capitalist. His name is Vinod Khosla, and he says, whom you ask for advice and on what topic may be the single most important decision you make as an entrepreneur. So I think it's important that whatever I'm saying here, take it with a grain of salt, and it may have no applicability to your life. And also please recognize that I'm only speaking from my own experience. And yes, I've read, and yes, I've talked to a lot of other entrepreneurs. So I'm trying to aggregate a lot of viewpoints here, but still, this may not apply in your case. Now, with that disclaimer aside, the first thing I would recommend, and I say this from experience, is before you start your own company, work at a startup first, because that helps you do two things. Number one, you get to learn on someone else's dime. You don't have to put up the risk, and you don't have to mortgage your house and, bankrupt yourself and put it on your credit card, and you don't have to do any of that. And yet at the same time, you get all the benefits of being exposed to an early stage startup. And the second reason is it gives you an idea of what it actually takes to build a startup. And it also depends on when you enter. I happened to work at Top Hat, which was the startup I had mentioned earlier in this discussion, when I was, I think, employee number 12 or 15. So these were the early days. And you kind of get to really realize what it takes to build this from the ground up, how to build teams, how to hire, how to raise money. And you get to live the stress, and you can kind of smell in the air the tension and excitement and depression and euphoria involved in being in an early stage company. And then you get to decide if that's really what you want. And it's okay, by the way, if it isn't what you want. So I think before you start a company, if you have the opportunity, and if you can take some risk out of the equation by working at another startup, even for a short period of time, I think that can be really invaluable to informing your decision. Now, the second thing I will say is there's a big distinction between having a really good idea and having a business. And I think the litmus test is whether people are actually willing to pay money for your idea. So if you have a really cool product or a really cool innovation, it's really nice that your family and your relatives all think it's awesome. But unless people are actually willing to trade hard, cold cash for that product, it's not exciting enough. And that whole sort of product market fit thing that you need to figure out. But let's assume you've done all of that, and now you decided, okay, tomorrow, September 25, I'm going to go and incorporate my startup, and I'm going to get started. Number one, if you can, I highly recommend considering a co-founder. I've had the privilege and the benefit of having co-founders, and I can't actually imagine in hindsight what it would have been like if I had tried to do this all by myself. There's going to be a lot of very emotional decisions, a lot of very difficult, experiences, and to have someone else that you can kind of bounce ideas back and forth with, someone else who can also sometimes push back against your bad ideas, and to do so from a similar level of status and power, so that you're not your own obstacle. That is extremely important. And I think it's also crucial to understand, what does your baby look like? When your child is born, if your child has, give patience to anyone who experiences this. And, my wife and I actually met by having co-founded a nonprofit that helps families that have children with disabilities. Depending on what your baby is, you need to radically organize your life to accommodate that baby's needs. So if you happen to have a baby that is very capital intensive, so my business is extremely capital intensive for two reasons. One, we're not just building a company, we're building an industry. So we have to do a tremendous amount of R&D. There's no precedent for that we're pioneering, and that's just a lot of money. And on top of that, we're building infrastructure and manufacturing, and we're designing systems, and it's food production. So, my business is not a Silicon Valley enterprise software company. So I shouldn't look at what those businesses are doing and they're doing successfully and compare and try to emulate those approaches, because they're not going to work. And they're not going to fail because my business is bad. It's just because it's mismatched to that stencil and to that way of doing business. So I think it's really important from the get-go to understand, what is your business and what does it need and what does it look like? And if you're willing to be content with that and to accept the challenge that presents, and then to go and pursue the resources, both human capital and financial capital, to make it happen, that's fantastic. Now, there's no way in 2-3 minutes we can cover this big discussion, so I'll just recommend a few things. One, there's a number of books you can read, and I'm happy to share some books that I think could be really helpful to anyone looking to start a company. There's a lot of amazing podcasts. There's a lot of really good, publications and series out there. And finally, there's a lot of really good business competitions that you can kind of use again, and that could be a good way to gauge whether you're onto something. Or the startup incubator, where you can go and spend some time meeting really interesting people, and maybe you meet a co-founder there and you start tinkering with an idea, and then that incubator kicks you guys some seed capital to launch your business. So try to be very thoughtful about the risk profile, because the early days of your startup are going to involve a tremendous amount of pivoting and changing your mind. So don't risk everything on the first idea that you have that's really exciting. Be thoughtful about that. And of course, gauge your risk based on your circumstances, and everybody knows their circumstances better. I hope that was helpful, but it's challenging to try to distill it all in 2 to 3 minutes. So inshallah, if I can be of any assistance or if I can elucidate any of those further, I'm happy to take it offline.
Thank you so much for everybody for joining us for the Mass's first homecoming event. A really special thank you to our speaker, Mohammed Ashour, and for his amazing sharing his experiences and truly amazing journey. And to our partners and colleagues who helped make this event a success. I want to throw a special shout out to the McGill Alumni Association, who helped set up the technology for this and have given us a lot of support along the way. We hope you enjoyed today's event. I know I did, and you found it interesting, beneficial, and fun. And some of you may not have had the chance to finish your conversations in the Zoom meetings themselves, but social media being what it is, I hope you'll take this opportunity to connect with those people outside this event on the LinkedIn group, and this is a plug for our the Mass LinkedIn group as well, and we also have a presence on Facebook. We'd also encourage those of you who aren't already members to become members of the Mass. It's completely free, there are no obligations, and it's open to both McGill graduates as members and to non-graduates as friends of alumni. You can, once you join, you'll get notifications about our future events like these. Potentially we might have Mohammed Ashour come speak again, which would be lovely. No promises though. And you hopefully partake in any ongoing projects that we have. So, we've had so far more than 200 graduates and students, and I hope you'll join us in building this foundation for the society that hopefully will last for the years and generations to come, and help build a society of excellence and ihsan, excellence and beauty for the McGill community. So once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our speaker. And I hope to see you again in the future, whether that be virtually or inshallah in person. I also want to mention again that the recording, the session was recorded and hopefully will be made available to people who registered for the event. So, and a final thank you, of course, to Mohammed for his inspiring words.